What's up out there, everybody? I hope you're all fantastic. Today we're talking about Antebellum, starring Janelle Monae. It had its PVOD release this past weekend, and it looks like it's already a polarizing film that seems to be dividing audiences. I think this is a unique movie in the sense that to completely dive into it, it will require some spoiler talk. So if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want the plot ruined, you may want to pass on this video, go see the movie, and of course come back. And if not, stick around and we're going to dive into it. So the story here plays out in what seemingly is two different timelines. You have Janelle Monae playing Veronica, a successful author living in the current day. Then you have Monae playing Eden as well, a slave on the plantation in what is presented as the what appears to be pre-Civil War era. And if you have seen the film, you know the big reveal here is that that isn't the case, and that in fact this movie plays out in just one single timeline with Veronica and Eden being the same person. We learn that Veronica has been kidnapped and forced onto this plantation with other African Americans to live out their current days as if it was still the era of slavery. And I think that twist, if you want to call it, is what seems to be where many are having issues with the movie. Looking at the premise from afar, I think it shows potential conceptually. However, I feel the development of it in this film and how it was revealed was a bit of a miss. But before we dive into what I felt the main flaws of this film were, let's get into the positives, because I do think there are plenty of them. First off, Janelle Monae, I thought she was fantastic in the lead, delivering a strong, multi-layered performance as both Veronica and Eden. I think she's given more room to work as Veronica than Eden, but overall, this movie relied greatly on her carrying both of these characters, and I thought she absolutely did with an emotionally gripping performance. I also thought the supporting cast was solid as well, in particular from the actors in the much smaller roles. I also thought the direction from Bush and Renz in their first full feature debut was nicely done. I felt they framed the shots effectively to captured the emotional agony of the characters while out on the plantation. They also captured both a style and elegance in the modern day timeline. I also thought the cinematography was fantastic, with many beautifully staged scenes that subtly juxtapose the horrific acts playing out in the story, and overall it does have an artistic look and style to it that I found to be very visually appealing. I also felt the story in theory and concept was interesting when watching the movie, and then just going back and looking at the film as a whole. However, the progression of it for the messages it wanted to deliver felt a little bit misguided, and I can kind of see where people may not like this movie because of that. I think the reasons this story misses the mark are primarily because that reveal was way too late in the runtime, and because there wasn't enough back and forth between Eden and Veronica's character arcs. For the first straight hour of the movie almost, it plays out like an unrelenting story of slavery that takes viewers down a path in cinema we have seen many times. It doesn't hold back either. It does take the viewer down a dark but historically accurate portrayal of the era and just the brutality and the horrific acts of slavery, which is something that audiences may not have been ready for given how grossly mismarketed this movie was. Because for me at least, the trailers gave the impression of this movie being much more of a twisted horror flick. At times that is the case, but one scene in particular in the trailer with this airliner flying overhead that disappears and reappears, for me at least, gave me a completely different impression of what this movie was aiming to be. It felt like it might have a sci-fi element to it, and while that's a small thing, it does subconsciously take you in a different direction than what this movie really is trying to be. After about an hour of seeing an unyielding depiction of slavery, the story shifts. We get to see Veronica for the first time in what clearly is modern time, just living her life. While we see Veronica's story begin, you're sort of just kind of left wondering what the traumatic first hour of the movie was for. We later learn that Veronica's story was actually before Eden's, because she's been kidnapped by this group, taken to private property, and forced into slavery along with many others. And personally, I think the timing of this film confirming that Veronica and Eden were the same person came way too late. I don't think this aspect of the film needed to be a reveal or a twist at all to capture the audience. In fact, I think had this movie made that fact known early on and switched between both Veronica and Eden's timelines more frequently, I thought would have made a major difference in the plot landing with more wide appeal, as it would have just injected you deeper into Eden's situation rather than feeling like someone from the outside looking in. And yes, there are subtle indications throughout that something is not as it seems. We have the airliner flying overhead that, unlike the trailers, conveniently doesn't disappear and reappear this time. There's a scene where the Civil War reenactments in the nearby woods can be heard. There's a scene where Kiersey Clemons' character questions Eden about her knowledge of what's going on. We also see Eden timing the creaks in the boards on the floor, which we learn later is for her escape, and I don't think none of those moments would have been ruined had that reveal been made earlier on. Yes, there were many cues that hinted at this film's reveal that were nicely staged and framed up. However, to keep these reveals a secret until the time the filmmakers wanted, I thought came at the cost of just tangible actions, tangible thinking, and human actions, something that I think can also lead people to viewing the first hour of the movie as being a bit unnecessary and a little gratuitous. I think being in the loop of what was going on would have created even more of a visceral connection to the characters instead of time being spent curious to where it was going and when. You're supposed to take it at face value that everybody forced onto this plantation, knowing the lives they're from and where they're at, don't really speak to one another in private like you think people would if they had been kidnapped and were being held somewhere. We're given no timeline to see how long Veronica has been here, and how this movie plays out kind of gave the impression that simply taking people from their lives and putting them on this plantation was like a form of brainwashing them as well, and not letting the viewer in on this fancy twist led to cinematic secrecy that can easily result in convenient storytelling when what you really want is realistic storytelling. Because for a bulk of the film, in terms of personality and behavior, Veronica and Eden seemed like two completely different people until that time the movie needed to show them as one in the final act, and it did feel a little contrived and unauthentic. I think painting the picture of a strong-willed person like Veronica was, then portraying her as Eden, who we didn't know much about at all, was just a miss, because without a timeline or more detail on what was actually happening, you're left to just surmise things with face value thinking. I think the film should have swapped back and forth between Eden and Veronica's stories much more. It should have let the viewer in on what was happening so they could really invest into the characters' fight to get their freedom back and to end this horrible scenario that was happening. Would have created much more of a genuine connection to the characters, the film's messages, and the plot overall. I think this would have provided context to what we were seeing for a bulk of the movie, and it would have actually given more of a connection to the film's twist had that twist just been a story wrinkle. So overall, I'll give Antebellum 70% on the meter. I enjoyed parts of it. There were parts that I didn't like. There were issues in the writing for me, and I think it over-relied on a plot reveal that hindered what could have been a more enthralling story to lure you in. I think the film's reliance on this twist got in its way. It prevented the writing from just truly exploring what should have been a highly resonating plot that speaks great volumes to the world and society that we live in today and the work that we still need to do for equality. But at the same time, you know, the performances are fantastic. It's a beautifully shot film, so there's enough quality here to check out this film if you're curious to what side of the fence you stand on with this movie. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, drop it a thumbs up, leave a comment below. I'd love to talk movies with you guys. Share it with your friends, and without question, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can never miss a video. Here are some links to some recent reviews just in case you missed them. All my social media links and the link to our official website are down in the description below, and I'll catch you next time.